This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week, Jonathan Bennett and I talk with Luboš Kocman and Douglas DeMaio of SUSE about openSUSE and Leap and all kinds of adjacent topics that are really important and moving fast, and you need to hear it. And that is coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 718, recorded Wednesday, February 8th, 2023. Future of openSUSE Leap. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Collide. That's Collide with a K. Collide is an endpoint security solution that gives IT teams a single dashboard for all devices, regardless of their operating system. Visit collide.com/floss to learn more and activate a free 14-day trial today. No credit card required. And by Barracuda. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cyber criminals use them every day. Phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, plus 10 more tricks cyber criminals use to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Get your free ebook at barracuda.com/twit. Hello again, everyone, everywhere. I am Doc Searls. This is FLOSS Weekly, and I am joined this week by Jonathan Bennett himself. And
myself. I'm here myself.
You're like a month away from having your third child, which is strange for somebody who looks like he's
too young or too old.
No, too young, man. I had my third when I was too old, man. I was almost 50.
Some days I feel like I'm too old. Goodness.
Yeah. Wow, I'll bet. Yeah, I bet that's intense. So we're off to a little bit of a late start. So, you've been keeping up with what's going on with SUSE over the years?
A little bit. I mainly run Red Hat products, so Fedora, CentOS, Red Hat products and Red Hat derivatives. Put it that way. And so now I've pretty much moved to Rocky, although I've got a couple of machines that are Alma Linux. And I almost see the SUSE guys as cousins, maybe, because they tend to use RPM to build their distros as well. And then there's also, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, but there's some services that SUSE provides for the the entire ecosystem that's really helpful. So there's some neat stuff that SUSE does that I've used and I'm aware of. When CentOS made their big change from CentOS to CentOS Stream, SUSE was actually one of the options that I really considered. So it would have been SUSE Linux Enterprise to move a bunch of servers to. Didn't need to because other things popped up, but definitely paid attention to what they're doing.
We've actually
we have a lot to talk about. So let me hurry up and get into the bios of not one but two gents that we have here, which is Luboš Kocman and Douglas DeMaio. Luboš has been working for SUSE from, and I'm never sure what the right pronunciation is because I know
depends on the country.
SUSE, but anyway, in the Czech Republic, and the release manager for openSUSE Leap and Leap Micro. He's the driver of Adaptable Linux Platform Community Work Group. Owns the SUSE open source policy that was inherited from a predecessor 2 years ago. Helping Doug with the project representation at conferences in the Czech Republic, and he tries to help with anything related to SUSE's cooperation with young talents. I'll let him go into more about that. Douglas is a board member and manager of the openSUSE project, marketing communications and event manager for it as well, free open source and software enthusiast, and an expat and veteran, or an Army veteran, and SoCal native, and an 805 beer fan. And of course, I'm not in Santa Barbara right now, but I am a Santa Barbarian. And when I was drinking, I drank 805 beer, which is the regional beer from there. So I'll actually start with a question for that. Are you drinking that as an expat now somewhere, Douglas?
Funny enough, the openSUSE beer, that we have, that we bring to FOSDEM, the brewery here in the town, did a co-brew with 805 a few years back. So, but we can't actually get it over here. I mean, we have a lot of good beer in Germany, where I live. So, but when I go back, of course, I drink 805.
So to put that in full context, the area code for Central and South Coastal California is the area code 805, and it's in my phone. I have an 805 phone, and when people see it, sometimes I get this old home kind of thing. Like, oh wow, you're from 805. Is that like Santa Maria or Santa Barbara or Ventura? It's a thing. It's probably more identifiable as where you're from, I think, than some others. I don't know. That's probably about as far as we want to go into that. So tell us give us the kind of the opening framish on what openSUSE Leap is or are.
Me or Dak?
Go ahead,
Luboš.
Luboš. You
Right.
tend to be the release manager, so.
Makes sense, actually. So we have not just one, but multiple distributions right now. Each user, they have their own preference, right? Somebody actually likes to get stuff fast. He likes to be able to get the latest changes as soon as possible. And some people are a little bit more on the conservative side, and they like the usual 1 year or 6 months release cadence. So the Leap would be very typical distribution with basically a yearly cadence. So there's it every 12 months. The support is for 18, so there is 6 months overlap in between releases, where we actually keep updating the previous version. And it's really aiming at, if I would be recommending somebody like first openSUSE-based distribution, it would be probably Leap. It's the most traditional. It will be probably the easiest to get used to. And the other distros that are totally worth mentioning is Tumbleweed. That's the rolling distro you've probably heard about. So if you would be into Arch and stuff, I guess like Tumbleweed would be probably a better match for you than Leap. And then we have MicroOS, which is the third, I would say, most used out of everything that we have. And that's basically Tumbleweed on steroids. It's combining, so its desktop is combining Flatpaks, which is a little bit unusual for us, right? So the Firefox, most of GNOME actually comes from Flatpaks there. And it's immutable, which I'm not sure if you are aware of, but has read-only partition. All the updates go through transactional updates. You're using BTRFS, so snapshot, you're updating snapshot, rebooting into the changes rather than destroying your current system in case of failed update. So, yep, Leap would be the traditional one, probably closest to what people are used to.
And then how does SUSE Linux Enterprise?
Right.
Wow, that came out really weird. How does that fit in there?
I should have actually started with that, right? So Leap is basically based on the packages, the binary packages from SLES, right? So in the past, we used to rebuild the sources. That was basically Leap. So same release cadence as SLES. Same sources, just rebuilt with maybe different set of macros, maybe enabling different features on certain packages. And then in 15.3, 2 years ago, we've received an idea from product management. Hey, what if you would make it identical? So if we migrate from non-paid to paid, from Leap to SLES, takes like 2 minutes. You exchange few branding packages and done. So since about 2 years ago, we actually use SLES packages plus branding, and we supply, 8,000 community packages on top of SLES, and that would be basically Leap.
Excellent.
And the story actually started, it's been progressing ever since, I believe it was 2016. I was in a meeting when they talked about releasing the first binaries for it, actually. It was a good move. And I mean, that's kind of where you got, where you have a Leap 42, which that could be another conversation, some other point, right. But that's where it all started.
Leap 42. That sounds like a great band name. What is that?
Well, traditionally we were so our last regular release, which was similar to let's say Fedora on the 6-month release cycle, was 13.2, and so this meeting happened, and we looked at bringing the SLES and openSUSE at the time is what it was called, a little bit closer, and so we ended up having to rename. We ended up renaming the distribution so that people could identify with the differences. So you have Tumbleweed was sort of like beginning, let's say, to be redone because it was started off by Greg KH. And then, and so we needed something else to at least like explain to people the differences. And so we ended up coming up with, someone in the community came up with Leap. And of course, at the time, it was to align with SLE 12. So at least we had a storyline there, like, openSUSE Leap is always like 30 ahead. But then that kind of changed a little bit later. And we started off with 42 because traditionally within SUSE and openSUSE, a lot of projects that have started have had their main release as 4.2 or 42. Yes, being one of those.
Nice. Now, if I heard correctly, you pronounce it SLE instead of SLES for the actual enterprise offering?
It's the family of the products, right? There is no product called SLE, but it's the SUSE Linux enterprise product family that would be SLES, SLED, and so on. So employees refer usually to SLE as set of products or solutions, if you want. But we usually mean SLES, like in 99% of cases.
Okay. It's always fun to talk to someone for the first time because, you've seen it in text. You've probably sent emails, IRC about it. And the first time you hear like the original creator or somebody that works for the company pronounce something, your mind is kind of blown. Like I've been saying this wrong. My inner narrator has gotten this wrong for years and years. What in the world?
Well, SUSE, I think you're all saying it correct. I know there's a whole video on how to pronounce the name of it.
SUSE, yeah. SUSE.
I read years ago that it is to be pronounced the same way as the American band writer, John Philip SUSE. And so that's pretty much what I've stuck with until if one of you gentlemen want to correct me and tell me that I'm not quite right.
I would say you're correct there. I mean, right. Then again, you have phonetics, and that's one thing that is a little bit more different. I mean, Luboš could probably clarify that with his name.
In Czech Republic, we would say, yeah, exactly. So in Czech Republic, you would say SUSE. In Germany, some people say SUSE. Depends also on the region. They really pronounce Z for the hidden S. Yeah.
I was once in Prague and sitting in a conference table, and these people are talking in languages I don't know, and I'm asking them, "What are you speaking?" And this one says, "Well," the Czech one is saying, "Well, I'm speaking Czech," and the Slovak guy understands me, and the Slovak one says, "Well, the Czech one understands me, but they don't understand Polish, and I understand Polish."
That's true,
and it's crazy. I mean, I was once in the only time I was in Sweden actually was for a few minutes, and I'm half Swedish, by the way. My mother was Swedish, but I don't know any Swedish. And these two guys are talking, and I know one's from Denmark, and I said, "What are you speaking?" And he says, "Well, he's speaking Swedish, I'm speaking Danish." But I said, "What's the difference?" He said, "Well, it's mostly spelling." And I thought, we have nothing like that situation over here. But I want to get a little bit into the where SUSE is used and by whom. But first, I want to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Collide. The old saying, when the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Well, the traditional approach to device security is that hammer, a blunt instrument that can't solve nuanced problems. Even after installing clunky agents that users hate, IT teams still have to deal with mountains of support tickets over the same old issues, and they have no way to address things like unencrypted SSH keys, OS updates, or pretty much anything that goes on with a Linux device. Collide is an endpoint security solution. It's more like a Swiss Army knife. It gives IT teams a single dashboard for all devices, Mac, Windows, and even Linux. You can query your entire fleet to check for common compliance issues or write your own custom checks. Plus, instead of opening intrusive software that creates more work for IT, Collide's lightweight agent shows end users how to fix issues themselves. You can achieve endpoint compliance by adding a new tool to your toolbox. Visit collide.com/floss to find out how. That's KOLIDE.com/floss. So I want to ask, what is the geographic distribution of usage of SUSE in general? And also, any difference with openSUSE? And also, I'm thinking, I've always seen SUSE as an enterprise play, as it were. I think it became more so after the 8 Novell. I had a lot of involvements with Novell at that time, as well as covering SUSE for Linux Journal back in my old day job. So I'm wondering how does it look now? I always thought it's kind of a Euro company, but I don't know if it is anymore.
So I mean, I'll at least make some clarity points there. Like, so basically, I mean, we work for SUSE, but specifically, like, I would just be talking about openSUSE. And I can give you a demographic breakdown of sort of like, number 1 is US, number 2 is Germany, number 3 is Brazil, and number 4 is China, and 5 is Russia, as far as the leading sort of countries that we have on at least our Matamo, used to be called PWIC. But for the most part, I mean, granted, if you look at the map, it's used all over the world, really. A lot of use we have a big community in Indonesia. And then, of course, we have a lot of people just spread out throughout Europe. But I think I answered. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah, no, it does. I mean, you're clearly, Linux itself and open source, and pretty much everything in the open source world is international or non-national, I think is a better way to put it. It's interesting to break it down. And I imagine you're dealing with many languages as well, probably more than some other distributions are. A question there is actually, do you think of it as a distribution anymore? Is that still a relevant distinction?
Well, openSUSE really is, it has distributions under its umbrella because it's really a project filled with distributions, tools, and of course, community. So that's kind of how I would explain it, at least.
We also have a lot of tools which actually generate the distribution. We have projects actually that serve for translating of the software, which is not necessarily part of the distribution, right? It's actually above it. So definitely not just distro.
One of the big things that I've been aware of from openSUSE for a long time is the openSUSE build service, which the acronym there, OBS, means something different to a lot of us. But,
Studio.
Yes, I guess the studio there is the differentiator. But goodness, it's not very uncommon at all. You see quite often a package. You go to look up some piece of software, and they'll have a link. Here's where you can get our binaries from the openSUSE build service. And that's, if I remember correctly, that is not just SUSE, and of course, being RPMs, it'll probably work on Fedora and CentOS as well. But you guys, if I remember correctly, you have Debian builds and all kinds of builds that thing spits out, and a lot of people use it, right?
Yes, that's true. Can I speak about it, Doug?
Yeah.
So it's actually really like, even when we are trying to do partnership, I mean, as far as openSUSE goes with other companies, recently Cisco on the OpenH264, just like Fedora did it before, using OBS was one of the selling points because they actually have to provide binaries to Debian, to Fedora, and to us as well. And building it in a single place and have like maybe easy pipeline where to actually get the data from and just put it on their servers. Like OBS does the job for all of the distros, right? So yeah, you can even build like binaries for Windows. We are building Apex, WSL through cross compilation, right? With BinGW. So you can do that as well.
Very cool. And how does that tie in with OpenQA? I am much less familiar with OpenQA, but I'm seeing it here on a link on the same page. And it sounds neat, but I don't know much of anything about it.
Doug, you, me?
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm coming from Red Hat. Like that was my previous employer. And I can tell you that the OpenQA is probably one of the reasons why we can have like that many times less employees and still like deliver an amazing job. Right? Because if it wouldn't be OpenQA, like I can't imagine like how we would test all the software. So basically, how it works is it's a infrastructure, I would say, where you can actually test any arbitrary software. You have very powerful tools. You can write like script logic in Perl, and you can use image comparison to actually compare what you are getting with expected results. So you can test anything from like remote desktop to, I don't know, Windows installation. Stuff is running in VM, and you can really say, do this, and then check if the expected output actually matches, what we would like to. And it's awesome. Like before any change gets to distribution, we run like thousands of tests before it gets in, and then before we publish it to the users, additional tons of tests are executed, and it's really awesome. Back in Red Hat, I was actually trying to test Spice, which was it's remote desktop, and I was actually looking for something that could work with the canvas on the client, and there was no real test framework that we use image comparison, and this would have saved me a lot of time. So
it was a project that was started off from a Hack Week. Actually, we've had a few very successful projects started out from Hack Week. MicroOS one, WebLate, yeah, for example, and so it really has taken on a life of its own. The only reason Fedora started using it was really like one of the guys we work with like wrote a test for Fedora and found a bug, and then like it just took one initiative to start, and then there's other distributions that use it as well. It's very useful.
Including Fedora.
Fedora. You have KDE that uses it. You have Cubase OS that uses it. We actually have a few pages on the wiki, our wiki, that describes the other people that are, participating or at least using it. And then there's just that shadow usage that we randomly find out about here and there.
Yeah. So we've talked about Fedora and talked about Red Hat stuff. I'm real curious what the story is with RPM and how both the openSUSE world and the Red Hat world both use the same package manager. And I'm guessing there's a story there about not having the not invented here syndrome, but I've never actually heard it. Do you guys know the story of that?
That's way, back to the history. I joined SUSE like 4 years ago.
Okay.
I know this story happened, but I wasn't with the company then. But
so
Richard would know.
Are either of you involved with the ongoing RPM development? Because there's some interesting things coming down the pike for RPM itself.
So I have to oversee basically any package change coming to the distribution. I'm not really focusing on one or the other package. For me, it would be probably like distribution images and other stuff. That's more relevant to what I would be doing.
All right. So the big change that I see, and this has caught my eyes because I'm talking to you guys, because when you go into the RPM source, you can see of course, their pull requests, and you get to see who it is that's writing the code. And RPM just had added to it support for microarchitectures. So, the different players in the industry have put their heads together and said, okay, these are the processor features that make an x86-64 V2. These are the processor features that make an x86-64 V3. And it's things like support for MMX, and AVX 512 is one of the things for V4, actually. RPM now has the ability to differentiate between those, and from what I understand, deliver the highest version number to your install that your machine supports, and that seems pretty interesting. But the guys that wrote the patches have the openSUSE badge that they work for openSUSE. So is this a feature that's coming to one of the openSUSE distros?
So should I cover that, Doug, or?
Absolutely, you know a lot more about it. I can add a little bit, but
yeah, I can give you like the background. I'm not sure about the usage of that particular feature, but I can tell you, I can summarize like what we've had as an issue and what we came up with as a solution. So there was that amazing idea for our next generation product portfolio that we would get the most out of the current CPUs, right? Well, second most. We wouldn't go for V4, but the idea was say, let's go for V3, right? And that was basically that was communicated to community, and then there was huge amount of pushback, right? Because you have to support communities. That's Haswell and Neuer, right?
Machine.
Yeah, exactly. Haswell and Neuer. Actually, everything that I have on the desk would be running it. But you can imagine the pushback, right? And then we were actually looking into, okay, so what are the alternatives? How can we still deliver like the most that we can, right? But like supporting as much hardware as we can. And we've considered V2 as the base level, basically, to actually support something newer, but that would still cost us some of the hardware, right? And there was still a pushback. And then in the end, we've actually decided to stay on the, well, at least as far as Tumbleweed goes, openSUSE. Not necessarily SUSE's new products, but Tumbleweed goes, we've decided to keep the current base architecture level, get rid of the 32-bit Intel, like the i386, i586 from the main distribution, make it, we call it ports, secondary architecture. So it's built separately, doesn't block builds for the primary architectures, which is ARM and Intel. And we actually decided to go for HVCAPs, which is basically building that particular library, right, with the optimization while leaving the basically the rest of the packages in distribution intact. And we could maybe even offer the HVCAPs for V4. So this is the direction where we decided to go for with Tumbleweed. For Alp, I'm not sure. I think that the last news that I've heard was that it will be V2 by default. May change. We are still in the prototype phase, right? We went from V3 to V2. Now Tumbleweed is going for basically V0 plus HVCAPs. So I can imagine how the HVCAPs actually is one of the reasons why actually we want the feature in, right? So we can deliver the latest one, maybe for V4, in my case, for example, here.
Yeah,
but it was very spicy topic. You can imagine the pushback on the mailing lists. Hey, what about my hardware, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a pair of servers down in a data center in Dallas, and with the latest release of CentOS, Rocky, all of Red Hat stuff, one of the servers now will not run the latest RHEL binaries because it's just old enough. It's an AMD, and it's
V2, right?
It's still. Yeah, I think it's V2, so it doesn't quite support V2. And I discovered that the hard way. Went to migrate a VM over to it, and the VM just stopped. You start digging into it, it's like, oh, that's a pain, because it's still good hardware. Yeah. So I can imagine people being frustrated over that.
That's one of the differences that I see. We did really actually took it the hard way, announce the proposal and then actually take all the input, and it was painful, but I think that we did the best possible, how would you call it, compromise to actually deliver what's asked and still make people happy.
Yeah, there was a good 150 comments on that on the mailing list. It was constant. It was like back and forth, and
people actually showing data. You are not going to get as much as you believe, and so on and so on. Yeah.
You only got 150 angry comments? That's rookie numbers.
But we are talking about like core contributor group, right? We are not talking Reddit. We are actually literally talking the internal mailing list of the closed community.
Oh, okay. 150 angry comments from your actual developers. Okay, that's quite a few.
Yes, which is pretty much maybe a little bit more than that. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm curious, and it seems on topic since we're talking about architectures. What about some of the other less mainstream, maybe soon to be mainstream architectures? Is there a RISC-V distro or a install for any of the openSUSE products? And then what about some of the others like Power and Lord help you if you have to, but MIPS and some of those things?
I can, Doug, it's up to you.
Yeah, go ahead. I mean, go ahead. RISC-V is going along, but go ahead.
Yeah. So I believe that actually that was considered to be one of the primary architectures for Alp later in the release. Well, maybe in one of the newer versions, not in the initial release, but it's definitely on the radar, right? In OBS, you can already build for RISC-V. I know that universities are actually quite happy for it. I've seen several. I have even one of the RISC-V stickers for my laptop because some people were really just happy with what they can do in OBS, and that makes me happy that universities actually use OBS for this reason. Yes. SLES. So SLES is actually built for Intel, Power, S390, ARM, and Lib actually took it a little bit further because we want to again support some of the community hardware. So we are even supporting 32-bit ARM, which is not supported on SLES. And we are still supporting S390 and everything in Leap. So that's it. It was an effort. We actually had to decouple it from the main distribution because we were not able to get ARMv7 spinning as fast as the rest of the arches, for example. So it was quite pain, but again, we were listening to users. We wanted to make sure that we do not let anybody down. And it cost us quite a lot of effort. RISC-V is on the radar, but it's not part of any basically mainline distribution. But you can still build in OBS for RISC-V. But I would say the challenge is with hardware, right? Once we will have decent builders for decent prices, like it's going to be much better.
Right. So that was what I was just going to say. One of the problems with doing RISC-V at this point as a distro is there's just not hardware out there for it yet. There's a few places that are making it. The prices are starting to come down. In fact, I should have my first RISC-V board showing up later today, and I'm actually pretty excited to go start playing with that. It's one of the Vision 5 Mark IIs, and they finally shipped it after the Kickstarter. I don't remember what distro they've put together with that. It's one that it's not Fedora, so it's gonna be outside my comfort zone.
I know that Star 5 actually works quite a bit with some people within openSUSE, and so I mean it could very well be. I mean we're in communication with them constantly.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, that's neat. It's fun to see kind of the Linux world, the open source world, as we have started to embrace this new ISA, this new platform. And I think there will be some real fun things come out of that, and some of the other platforms that are out there. It's just good to see everything moving forwards that way.
I'm really looking for anything from Pine64 with RISC-V, other than Pinesel, which you can't really run fully fledged distro on it. But yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah, Pine64. I think at one point Arduino was talking about putting something out that was RISC-V too, and I don't remember if that ever happened. But we will really know that we've made it when the Raspberry Pi Foundation puts out something that's RISC-V.
Yeah.
Well, I want to cut in here and pivot to another topic, but I'm going to tease that. And for now, say that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Barracuda. In a recent email trend survey, 43% of respondents said they had been victims of a spear phishing attack, but only 23% said that they have dedicated spear phishing protection. How are you keeping your emails secure? Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them every day. Phishing, conversation hacking, ransomware, plus 10 more tricks cybercriminals use to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Are you protected against all 13 types? Email cybercrime is becoming more sophisticated and attacks are more difficult to prevent. Attacks use social engineering, including urgency and fear, to prey on victims. Social engineering attacks, including spear phishing and business email compromise, cost businesses an average of $130,000 per incident. As demand for COVID-19 tests increased at the start of 2022, Barracuda researchers saw an increase in COVID-19 test-related phishing attacks increase by 521% between October and January. As public interest rises, for example, in cryptocurrency, the opportunity for attacks becomes ripe. As the price of Bitcoin increased by almost 400% between October 2020 and April 2021, Barracuda research also found that impersonation attacks grew 192% in the same period. In 2020, the Internet Crime Complaint Center, the IC3, received 19,369 business email compromise, that's BEC, email account compromise, that's EAC, complaints with adjusted losses of over $1.8 billion. Securing email at the gateway level is not enough anymore. It's still important to leverage gateway security to protect against traditional attacks, such as viruses, zero-day ransomware, spam, and other threats, but your gateway is defenseless against targeted attacks. Protection at the inbox level, including AI and machine learning, is necessary to detect and stop the most sophisticated threats. Get a free copy of the Barracuda Report, 13 email threat types to know about right now, and you'll see how the cyber criminals are getting more and more sophisticated every day and how you can build the best protection for your business, data, and people with Barracuda. Find out about the 13 email threat types you need to know about and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at barracuda.com/twit. That's barracuda.com/twit. Barracuda, your journey secured. Okay, so I wanted to ask, I have to go to a different, okay, so an interesting thing to me is that, and I mentioned earlier the Novell acquisition, and I said that SUSE acquired Novell. It was actually the other way around, and the history there is kind of wild. And actually, Linux Journal was a SUSE house for some of its early years when we were still in Seattle, and we were a Debian house for we moved around, but SUSE was a favorite of ours. And then there's this Novell acquisition, and then if I look through Wikipedia, that was a Novell was acquired by Attachmate. Attachmate went with Micro Focus International. That was acquired by OpenAttic. And then there was an acquisition of HPE OpenStack and Staccato. And HPE was Hewlett Packard Enterprise. Then there was a sale to EQT Partners, and then there's an acquisition by Rancher Labs. I didn't actually know about all this. I didn't pay any attention to it. But all these things happened, and there was an IPO. And then there was this acquisition by New Vector. And the interesting thing to me is that it's a $500 million company, SUSE is, and it has survived as an identity through all of those things. I mean, who remembers Novell anymore? Who remembers Attachmate or half of those things that were way back when?
I lived quite through most of that, except the Novell acquisition.
Yeah, and so it's interesting to me that I mean, the only thing I notice is that it went from having the lowercase u to the uppercase u. Like nobody bothered to explain that anymore, and the gecko is still there, right? So it's like it's sort of interesting to live through all that, and yet it's sort of like the buoyancy of the identity that is SUSE has stayed at the top of that. So to tell me a little bit about living through all that, or what that actually means. It may mean nothing really, I don't know, but to me it's the durability of a brand, as it were, to look at it in marketing terms.
I leave it to Dak. For me, it was peaceful. I joined basically under a Micro Focus. Therefore, only one acquisition by equity. Yeah.
So interesting enough, I live with I live next to another American, who started out with SUSE. I think he was employee number 50 or something like that. And he lived through a lot of that. He actually went to Canonical, came back. But I got a lot of stories from him, and I mean, it really is. Yeah, I mean, it started out as basically doing translations, doing documentation. And that's kind of where it grew from, and it has been resistant. And I guess, with a good product, you just can't kill it, right? It just keeps going on. And the whole Novell thing happened. I heard stories, that they flew in here, and of course they came to Nuremberg, and it was rather, what was it? It was kind of like at a prime point where they really needed to sell. And then I think the rest from that point on, it was sort of like, it was just pure margins, I think, is kind of how they ended up getting purchased. That was the whole Attachmate, and then moving on to Micro Focus, and just they became sectioned off as business units, and including up to the point where when we were with Micro Focus, Novell was made a business unit, and was also so was Attachmate. So, but the acquisitions that kind of went from there were, what was it? The EQT. I mean, that was more of we became how did that work? I guess a fund. Right? We were a fund. We were part of think of a mutual fund, and we were fund number 8 as far as I remember. And then of course, new leadership kind of came in, and then they went to the SUSE was floated around on the stock market, from what I could tell, and then landed on Frankfurt Exchange. So, but we had the founders. Actually, one of the founders still works for the company. And you would go outside and hang out with him. It's just it's a very unique company. I'll just say that.
Yeah. So I write for Hackaday, and I've been there for a couple of years now, and we've kind of gone through the same thing. Been sold and bought a couple of times, and we're now under Siemens technically, and that was a little nerve-wracking when that happened, but we've kind of got the same thing going on. It's enough of a brand, and we do well enough that they've just left us alone, which has been really nice. But it speaks well to what openSUSE is and is all about. That even the corporate overlords are just like, let's not mess with the geeks. Let's let them do their thing. They're doing good work there. We need to let them do it.
That's true. By the way, maybe one correction, because Doug actually mentioned it. He mentioned Neuvector and he mentioned Rancher. That were actually done acquisitions by SUSE, right? Not that they would purchase us, just to correct it.
All right. Well, I want to dig into, unless Doc has another follow-up.
No,
if Doc
go
has
for
a follow-up, he's the boss. All right. I want to dig into Tumbleweed, because I'm not very familiar with Tumbleweed, and it reminds me a lot of Rawhide over on the Fedora side, and Rawhide eats babies, and I don't think Tumbleweed is supposed to eat babies, is it?
It's not. The difference is OpenQA, really. Like, I feel like that's the main difference, right? Rawhide is Rawhide, basically. You build it, it's there, you can consume it. Here we actually have gatekeeping, right? So as I've mentioned, before anything actually gets accepted in factory, there is several reviews. One, in development projects, so actually group around the packages, like say Python developers, they have to be okay with the change. Then we kind of submit it for factory. Let's try to include it in Tumbleweed. Factory is sort of it's Tumbleweed that yet didn't pass testing. Let's call it this way, okay? So it's before.
It's the beta branch of Tumbleweed.
No, it's the same. Let's say, and whatever passes testing from factory actually ends up in Tumbleweed. Okay, factory would be like the development project below Tumbleweed. Cool. So I would say that's the main difference, really. Like, you should probably compare Rawhide more to factory, but like Tumbleweed is actually distribution that went through the changes that are actually not identified as breaking our system, made it in, and it's thousands and thousands of tests being executed on top of each. So that's the main difference, right?
Sure.
Good. So Tumbleweed actually started out. Greg Cage is one of the kernel developers, and he used to work for SUSE, and he actually came up with the idea of Tumbleweed, where he basically was trying to, put it in the latest kernel. And I mean, he had his ideas that it was supposed to be like a rolling kernel, and then ultimately what we've determined, like he went on to work for the Linux Foundation, and we actually asked him if we could retake that name, because we figured out that to be able to move one thing, you have to be able to move everything, and that is kind of like really where Tumbleweed is really excelled, because we figured out that process. We figured out how to make that happen. And then with OpenQA being sort of a inhibitor or something, it's basically what allows us to roll as quickly as we can. And I think we recently had a streak of, I don't know, we must have gone on like 70 straight snapshots or something like that. So.
Yeah, so I was going to ask how bleeding edge Tumbleweed is, but you guys have kind of you've dived into that a little bit. But I mean, let's just take the kernel. What generally is that lag time between Torvalds and Greg say, all right, this kernel is out, it's released, so we're going to get another one in a week and a half. How long does it take for that minted kernel to show up in Tumbleweed?
So I do a lot of the coverages.
Does it pass testing, right? Yeah. Go for it, sorry.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm the one that tends to write all the, weekly blogs on Tumbleweed, and you see it kind of come in, but my experiences over the years, it depends like how, I mean, obviously it's going to vary in where Linus might be on the, on the RC. And then like, as he transfers on, let's say he works on a new a major version or something like that, like that might be something that might cause some bit of lag time between, say, him passing it off to Greg or any of the other kernel developers. But I would say I've seen it where the RC kind of gets released and it comes right into Tumbleweed within like 24 hours. So it really depends though. It could take like a week, not much more though than a week though. You rarely see that.
Does Tumbleweed run RC kernels as opposed to waiting for the official release of them? People release, I suppose.
You have varying LTS kernels and you have varying RC kernels, and I'd really have to go to the website to see, but Linus usually touches that very top and then kind of passes it along, at least from what I've seen. And so when he gets it to a point where he's fine, then there's still some RCs, but like it's not considered stable, by any means.
Right.
But it functions.
Also keep in mind that there could be a big of lag also caused by other packages, right? Sometimes we can produce, 7 builds in a week, or 7 builds as in we have a new distribution build that we publish to users. And sometimes we may do just one a week because there is just some ongoing issue that we have to resolve, right? Like maybe issues with, latest glibc update or so on. And therefore there could be delayed, not caused by that maintainer wasn't quick enough, but some overall situation of what are the incoming changes to the distro right now at the moment. That could add a few days, for example.
So I assume Tumbleweed is, because it's so up to date, it's got all of the new desktop toys. So you can run Wayland, you can run Pipewire. It's got the WireGuard packages. All of that stuff is there if somebody wants a really up to date desktop.
Yes, correct. Also, we have a very nice rule that basically anything that ends up in any SUSE product or Leap, for example, as well, which is sort of openSUSE project, right, has to go to Tumbleweed first. We call it factory, right, as opposed to the development project, but that's the rule. So that there will be all the features that will have made their products, and nice because that everything will go eventually upstream.
And what does happen though, you'll see, like, for example, KDE, Jonathan Riddle, we were at Academy one year, and of course he came up, he said, I really appreciate you guys with OpenQA because like we're able to catch some things and then pass along to upstream. Like, so I mean, if they have their tests built for OpenQA, then it just allows their release to be tested more quickly and get that new release out the door. And we do, and occasionally you do see some RCs enter into Tumbleweed, but by that time it's usually like RC2 or RC3, and then next thing you know, you have the new major version or whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to jump into something about trade shows, because I know you guys just came from one, and we just had Ilyan Rabinovich from Scale on last week, and it's a big important part of the whole thing. But first, I have to let everybody know that joining Club TWiT is another great way to support our network. As a member, you'll get access to ad-free versions of all the shows on TWiT, as well as other great benefits. There's a bonus TWiT Plus feed, which includes footage and discussions that didn't make the final show edit, as well as bonus shows we've started, such as Hands on Mac, Hands on Windows, Ask Me Anything, and fireside chats with some of your favorite TWiT guests and co-hosts. As FLOSS Weekly listeners, you may also be interested in checking out another Club TWiT exclusive show, the Untitled Linux Show, hosted by our own Jonathan Bennett. So sign up to join Club TWiT for just $7 a month. Head over to twit.tv/clubtwit and join today. So you guys just came from FOSDEM, and I mentioned we had Scale on. First, what'd you get there? And how important are trade shows in general now? Because they've gone through a lot of changes over the years in the whole ecosystem. Where do they fit?
So yeah, I guess I'll go ahead and start that. Luboš and I did have a shot of, well, I'll leave that another time. We of course we had some beers, but It's so FOSDEM is quite different, and it's not necessarily a trade show. It's the biggest open source event, at least that I've ever been to or ever seen, and it's all community driven. So you're not going to have any companies there or anything like that. It's all projects, and people that have released projects under the various open source licenses that are there. It is important to be there because that's where a lot of important conversations take place. A lot of development takes place there, and you'll see a lot of bugs get patched or just, even ideas expanded upon. And then if you look at the events that surround that, I mean, you can have companies that sponsor it, but they're not going to have a table there. I mean, CentOS will be there, but that's not going to be Red Hat there, right? openSUSE is going to be there. It's not going to be SUSE. But anyway, you'll have like Google Summer of Code. They'll have some sort of meetup that takes place there. You'll have trainings that happen along the way. There's also a very good configuration management camp that happens a couple of days afterward. So I mean, Brussels during this time, roughly around the time of the Super Bowl, is just the place that you want to be if you're an open source developer, to see as many talks as you can, get on the latest, get the latest knowledge about what's changing within projects or what direction they're heading in. And then going back to Scale, Elon, great person. I really appreciate Scale. We have a good community in Los Angeles there, or Southern California, that helps with the booth. I've been there several times, and I really do enjoy it when I do get back home and hanging with them. But unfortunately, I won't be able to be there this year.
Yeah, I'm not going to be there this time. It's I'm going to break my record for not being there every time. I think next year I'll make it though. There's always something coming up, and I live in Southern California much of the time. Yeah. So, Jonathan, did you have something there? I'm not sure if you did or not. If not, I'll go.
So I've got a couple of other things I wanted to ask about. But first off, what is Adaptable Linux? I've seen that kind of platform. As the Adaptable Linux platform. What is that about?
Me or you, Dak? It's me, right?
That's all you. Yeah.
I guess it's so right now it's a platform, right? It's something that SUSE experiments with. It's currently still in the prototype phase. I think that we are going to have third prototype probably within a month or similar, maybe two. And I guess like to people who are sort of familiar with openSUSE, I would say it's a way of productizing the concept that was developed with MicroOS, right? That's the immutable distribution, the third one, most installed out of whatever openSUSE project offers. And it's basically, we already had similar experiments or even successful projects called SleepMicro, which is basically a very small host. It's really focused to be container and VM host, right? It's immutable. So you are using transactional updates. You are always updating the BTRFS snapshot. And I guess ALP is basically a code stream refresh of SLES, right? But using the concept and the way how distribution looks like that's sort of adopted from MicroOS. Because as you know, SLES 15 is aging, right? For enterprises, that may be a good thing. We are providing support for next, 15, 20 years. But there are needs to actually have updated code stream, like newer Python, newer Ruby. And the ALP is basically take on that, but done a little bit differently. I think it's quite actually brave, to be innovative in this. The differences are, if I can maybe mention, like, what's the plan for desktop, at least based on the current prototype state, like we would like to run like containerized GDM and including the GNOME session in the container on top of ALP, right? So that's basically separating the base OS from any sort of workloads, be it desktop, be it some container runtime, be it VMs that are running on top of. And there are fundamental differences such as YAST. You all know it, right? It's the famous tool from distro. People like to use it. It's simple. And even that, if you trigger YAST from command line, it's actually a spawning container on the background. And therefore, you are actually really you're sort of erasing that level from the user. He doesn't even know that it's containerized, but it is. So it's quite cool concept. And we are still early. Some stuff may change, but I think it's something to really definitely watch if you are interested in that era of immutable distributions. Could be Silverblue and Fedora, sort of. They just have different take on it through OS3, right? We are using Btrfs. We are actually relying on snapshots from it. So it's really tight. You cannot really use our immutable systems with like Ext or any other file system than Btrfs. Mainly, I would say, if you would ask who should be using it, is really people who are going to run VMs, containerized workflows, and so on. But we also plan to have desktop there, right? Just like MicroOS, they have desktop as well. MicroOS's desktop is utilizing Flatpaks, which is also quite new, I would say, for most of the mainstream distributions. Like by default, right? You install it and you have Flatpaks there. And
so
I believe.
Yeah, I have we talked about this a little bit before the show, but I'd like to bring the audience in on this too. Today's an interesting day because Microsoft, which was very involved in ChatGPT and OpenAI, basically integrated ChatGPT with Bing, its search engine. They want you to ask it questions, not make search queries so much. And at the same time, Google's competing. They have something called Bard, I think, and they're kind of leaning in the same direction of the user interface doesn't look any different yet. You ask it a question, you're going to get very kind of ChatGPT kind of answers. And I think given the degree to which search engines are our window into the web, that this changes the web itself. And what worries me, and the open source angle to this is, we don't know what's going on inside these machines. We had some idea of what was going on with the search engine. They index the entire web. They have something like PageRank that ranks results and so forth. That has changed a lot over the years, but our experience of it is kind of like going to a library and looking through the stacks, and you look through the card catalog and you find something there. But you go to original things, you're not getting an answer. You're getting connections to the actual sources. And the sources seem farther away, and this is an open source show. So I'm wondering what the connections there might be, or if you guys have thought much about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as we kind of were discussing earlier, like it has to be verifiable, right? Like you can be given information, but you really need to check it out to make sure that it's correct. I mean, I think some of us that have spouses might know that.
It's kind of like half trust and verify. Exactly.
But yeah, so I think it is rather important that remains, because once if you're consuming closed sources, right, in a sense like this with the AI, I mean, who knows where that world's going to go? It sounds pretty dangerous, and probably I'm sure that we can make a new movie about that.
I kind of see what Bing is doing in particular as, instead of looking through the card stacks, the card catalog, you're now asking the librarian. And the nice thing is, so far, they still give you the option of going and saying, hey, librarian, show me the book where you got that answer. But one of the things we were talking about before the show is, if that ever gets taken away, you're potentially in a really bad place, because you then have to trust the librarian. And, with the AI things going on right now, there's some real interesting things going on with that. The fun folks over at Reddit, for example, with the actual ChatGPT program, have figured out a way to jailbreak it. And there is a prompt you can give ChatGPT to say, essentially, I want you to pretend that you're a different character and give me answers without using any of your pre-programmed rules. And so you can then get ChatGPT to actually speak off the record, as it were, and give you the real answers, which is just mind-blowing.
But with profanities and everything, right?
Yes, all of that. But there's some other interesting angles for open source, and I think particularly of what GitHub is doing with Copilot and some of the questions around that. And I think, hasn't openSUSE just brought out some guidance on that?
Yes, not openSUSE, but SUSE in general. And I would say, just like with maybe news documentation, and if you are actually like using it as learning material for whatever the bot is going to tell you, you have to, you need to make sure that the license of maybe the article or the documentation that it's actually using is still being respected, right? Let's say that somebody uses Creative Commons and they want attribution, and the bot actually doesn't do that, right? He gives you information from some article and then breaks the attribution aspect of it. And we have the same issue with code, right? We have to make sure that the AI is actually really respecting the licenses and copyrights from the training material. And with Copilot, there were some cases where that wasn't the case, right? So SUSE actually, for now, we are refreshing the policy, which is sort of providing guidance to our employees and also, maybe partners if they want to use it, is saying that we shouldn't use it at the moment, not until the next revision. Maybe we will have new solutions that are popping, like AWS is coming with something as well, right? I believe it's called Code Whisperer. Maybe that could be a good candidate. But for now, time being, until probably next review in December, we are actually telling employees not to use any of that code, in any of our products, period.
Well, guys, we are actually we're out of time here. Usually I give a little warning, but we're running out of time. We actually are out of time. But we always end with a couple of simple questions for both of you. So we'll take a little more time. What are your favorite text editor and scripting language?
Doug, you want to start or me?
I'm Markdown, and gedit. So I'm a GNOME user, but that would be mine.
SUSE is very specific. OBS is probably done out of 5 different languages, right? So if you want to contribute to such project it will give you a hard time. But for me, it would be, I really used to love Sublime Text. If you know the editor, closest free alternative would be Atom, but otherwise Vim, right? Anywhere where I have terminal console, it would be Vim all the way. And language, probably Python.
Well, this is great. And, yeah. So this has been great and an awesome progress report. I'm really glad we got it, and we're going to have one or both of you guys back again to tell us what's gone down in the next 6 months, year, whatever it takes, because it's not going to stop. There's a lot of great responses to questions here. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thank you for having us.
And I hope.
Thank you.
So Jonathan, you have some great questions there, I got to say.
It kind of helps that Linux is my thing, and they mainly do Linux distros. I'm kind of inside baseball on that one, but that was great. It was a lot of fun to talk to them, and hopefully we hit the right level of nerding out, because we did a little bit, but not too much for our audience.
Yeah, I'm half Muggle, or probably more than half Muggle, but I'm just a bit of wizard. So I'm curious, did your server in the rack or somewhere, wherever it is in Dallas, did that survive? I mean, whatever you had to do with that?
Yeah, so it is running the previous version of CentOS of Rocky Linux now. And I've got my individual VMs set to, they're all running the previous version too. That way I can migrate them back and forth. That's the whole point of having the 2 machines, to be able to do live migrations, to reboot one for security issues or what have you. So yeah, for now it's hanging on, but I will eventually have to come up with something, either replace some hardware or move to a different distro, which sounds like a huge pain.
So that is hardware in a rack, in a place, a physical thing that you pay attention to.
Yeah, I'm just paranoid enough that I don't want to do everything on the cloud, because the cloud is just somebody else's hardware.
Yeah, man, and I made the move from a Rackspace rack to a Rackspace cloud, and I'm paying for it, I got to say. So that's
how long has those emails been missing now?
Since December 5th. December. Now, to be fair, I haven't called them up because I wanted to wait until the dust settled, and I'm still paying them. So I should get some good service out of that. But all my IMAP is not belong to us right now. It's somewhere else. So we'll see what happens with that.
Goodness.
I had many years of great experience with them when I had a thing in a rack, and then for a long time in a cloud too. But the cloud got attacked, and a lot of us are victims. And so,
the great advantage of having a thing in a rack, the great advantage and disadvantage is when something goes wrong, it was your fault.
I know that's true. And they warned me for a long time, saying something's going to go wrong with that thing. It's very old, and and I had some backup on it for a while, but finally got out of it thinking that the cloud itself is backup, and it was not. So, and I should have done some of my own. I own some of that too. Anyway, so next week, and I'm looking here at John Abbey, Co-Intelligence Institute and Community is going to be on. I hope they pronounced that right. Abbey, ABBE. Stays low in the alphabet there. So has the advantage of being at the beginning of the alphabet. Otherwise, being an S, I'm toward the end. I'm used to that. Anyway, this has been great. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Thanks to the guys. And we will see you all next week.
Hey folks, I'm Ant Pruitt. And what do you get your favorite tech geek that has everything? A Club TWiT gift subscription, of course. TWiT podcasts keep them informed and entertained with the most relevant tech news podcasts available. With the Club TWiT subscription, they get access to all of our podcasts ad-free. They also get access to our members-only Discord, access to exclusive outtakes, behind the scenes, and special content such as AMAs, which I just love hosting, plus exclusive shows such as Hands on Mac, Hands on Windows, and the Untitled Linux Show. Purchase your geek's gift at twit.tv/clubtwit, and it will thank you every day.